Mayan astrology, we can talk a little bit more about that and how it actually differs from Western astrology. But what I'm trying to bring more to the forefront is how to use it for magic, for astrological timing. Whereas how it's widely practiced is divination and kind of like a soft theurgy and how to navigate life. But as for thaumaturgic reasons, this is something that's a bit more closer to the chest of like a brujeria, like people that come from that kind of urban witchcraft mode.
Hello and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. In this episode, I'm joined by Meso-American occultist and historian Solomon Pakal for a wide-ranging exploration of Indigenous magic and its place in modern discourse. Drawing in his background in Indigenous traditions, Solomon takes us deep into Mayan ceremonial magic, ancestral veneration, and the role of intermediary spirits, while challenging how Indigenous practices are too often romanticised, distorted, or appropriated in Western esotericism. We discuss the 10 types of Mayan spirituality beyond the academic 5, the significance of corn in the cosmology, and the role of daykeepers who maintain the sacred calendar and its thaumaturgic functions. Solomon explains the practice of Nagualism, the power of hieroglyphic language, and the Koyopa system of energy work distinct from the Vedic chakras. We also explore the vast and sophisticated ceremonial structures of Meso-America, their cosmological systems, and how narrative and living stories function as a kind of hyper-sigil magic. In the Plus show, Solomon expands on these themes, delving deeper into the narrative worship, geospatial magic, and the hidden sophistication of Meso-American energetic practices. The conversation takes unexpected turns, from the obsidian mirror of John Dee, possibly Aztec in origin, and its link to Enochian spirits, to the enigmatic ritual of the angels from the books of Chilam Balam, with its unique vision of celestial ascent. Solomon connects these Indigenous American practices and differentiates them from Western occult traditions, making the case for why these systems remain vital and relevant today. And in a surprising parallel, we turn to combat sports as a living theatre of magic, where we hypothesize around Conor McGregor's meteoric rise and fall and the uncanny similarities with the current world champion of the lightweight division, Ilia Topuria. You're going to have to bear with us on that one, but there is something to it. We explore how both fighters embody narrative enchantment, peak performance, and the dangerous glamour of meteoric success. We hypothesize that when McGregor was no longer worthy of the flame he carried, that left him. Perhaps Ilia Topuria is the current holder of that flame. Solomon also shares his own training experiences and the role of ritual in the fight game, showing how magic finds expression in the octagon as much as it does in the temple. Now, if you'd like to hear the Plus show, simply visit the Patreon link in the show notes and come and join the Patreon. You'll get not just this Plus show, but 5 years worth of the back catalogue with some of the most interesting people you can imagine, along with a heap of bonus content. And if that doesn't float your boat, you can always just buy an episode and just treat yourself to that and leave it there. Now, equally, if you're not keen on Patreon, you're oversubscribed, I get it. But if you still like to support me, which I'd appreciate, you can always pick up a copy of my book, Son of the Dark Man, for Little Witches. And I'm going to leave it there. Okay, let's get on with the show. Solomon Pakal, you are very welcome to Spirit Books. Lovely to have you on the show.
It is an absolute delight to be here. Dara, I told you I've been a fan of the show for a long time, and it's been a long time coming. I said one day I'm going to be there. I'm going to be on Spirit Box one day.
Well, it was very kind of you to say, and thank you for reaching out. Your material is super interesting. I'm really glad you did. And I guess to just help orientate people, could you tell them a little bit about yourself and your practice?
Yeah, so my name is Solomon Pakal. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. My mother comes from a Kachikal Maya background. Ethnically, she's Kachikal Maya, but she essentially comes from a lineage of what are known in the modern day as brujas, which translates from Spanish to witches. Now, the term bruja and the term brujeria which is the art of witchcraft in Latin America, is a broad term, and I do want to specify that it's not necessarily an indigenous term. It
Okay.
is a term that is placed upon us by colonialism. So um, it is actually pretty broad in usage. It's a
Hmm.
pretty loaded term, and it differs from region to region. I was living in India a number of years ago, and they said that the language changes like every 7 kilometers, and that's brujeria changes about every 5 miles in Latin
Right.
America.
Okay.
So I noticed that there are a lot more brujeria like authors and authority figures coming out
Hmm.
in our community, and there's a level of camaraderie there, some kind of cultural continuity, but as far as some kind of lineage continuity, we are all very, very different. North Mexican brujeria is very different than what you will find in Guatemala City, which is very different than what you will find in Medellin, Colombia.
Hmm.
So it's a broad term. Again, it's a more colonial era term,
Hmm.
but the family history definitely traces back to a lot of cool pre-Columbian pieces of evidence. I'll say
Right.
that still discovering day by day. Discovering ancient stuff it's a full-time job. So
Right.
I'm trying to piece it together. My family's trying to piece it together as time goes on. But we have some really cool hypotheses of where in the pre-Columbian world our ancient ancestors, direct ancient ancestors, or I say
Right.
that less ambiguously, may have come from and what they prioritized with their magic because of the tendencies that our magic prioritizes.
Hmm.
A lot of people think that brujeria is just like putting things in jars or something. And I understand that could be the case for a lot across the map, but for some reason in my family, it's a much more dynamic art. And I believe it extends into more sophisticated magic that we'll probably get into in our
Yeah.
discussion. Now, my father, he's American of Anglo-Saxon descent. Um, I bring up the term like Latino a lot because it is applicable here, but technically, I've been saying this a bit more often. I'm technically not Latino because it's like my mom is indigenous. She comes from the borders of Latin America, but she is not like mixed Spaniard. My father's Anglo-Saxon, and he's not Latino, like from the Romantic speaking
Hmm.
countries. So I talk about a lot of Latino magic while technically not being Latino, but there's a lot of people within the borders of
Hmm.
Latin America that are not Latino
Hmm.
by blood standards. But my father was an adventurer. He was like the Indiana Jones type, a former military man and an intelligence veteran. So he was able to help essentially flesh out a lot of the Western understanding of what my mother's culture was. And it allowed for a beautiful dual vision
Right.
of the practice that I was raised in. On top of that, I was raised in communities where witchcraft and magic was a common thing.
Right.
A lot of people don't know this, but there's a massive thriving community of witchcraft neighborhoods all across the United States and big urban centers. But one of the biggest ones is Washington, D.C.
Right.
Um, it is kind of like uh, kind of like urban Alexandria between Miami, Florida, and New York City. Um, the big practice kind of binding it all together are botanicas that are ran by santeros. Santeria is kind of like the lingua franca in these places. However, about 6 out of 10 practitioners that would frequent these places and get involved in the practices were of either Mexican or Central American descent. So that's just the way that migrations and populations ended up working.
Mm.
Um, but the people that would own the shops were Dominican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, more often than not. So Santeria was kind of like this. And what's beautiful about Santeria is that still has like lineages and systems kind of documented and upheld by these communities, and they would throw parties and things like that. And um, like the Guatemalans would throw parties. So it was a very communal kind of way of making a cultural melting pot.
Okay.
That being said, there's a lot of cross training that happens. Cross training is typically informal. It's very street, as I like to say it. Um, but I grew up in those kinds of streets out of necessity. You grow up in bad neighborhoods, and people we have this saying that like kind of like south of the border mentality is like a box of cangrejos. It's like crabs in a bucket trying to
Hmm.
get claw and get to the top. And it's like a game of survival. So, and sometimes these bad neighborhoods, you have people that are trying to do magic for legal reasons, for safety reasons, for love reasons,
Hmm.
for money reasons, for job reasons, um, all kinds of things like that. High practical magic prioritization, and you see success stories. You see tragedy, but you see a lot of success stories when you see a person they're working 3 jobs, cleaning houses, cleaning office buildings, and then somehow they are able to make 6 figures, move out of the bad neighborhoods, and get a nice neighborhood house. They take their blessing, they leave, but I guarantee you that esposa probably knows a lot more about magic than a lot
Right.
of the people
Right.
talking about magic in on the internet. But they kind of just take their miracle and leave, and more power to them. But there's a lot of knowledge in those streets. So I kind of see myself as, uh, while I do identify primarily as a Meso-American occultist because I'm a steward of the game, and I do transcend that label of brujo, but I'll take it
Hmm.
because I've earned it as per my old padrino. But I want to connect the minutia between like what is found grassroots and what can be found in these places of discussion. Like you have carved such a wonderful part of our community, having a table for these discussions. So I do see myself as like an ambassador from these communities, and progressing that way of thinking. It's every immigrant mother has the dream that their son or daughter goes to school, gets a career, becomes
Hmm.
a lawyer, is always a lawyer or a surgeon, um, have some kind of respectable career. I wasn't a lawyer or a surgeon, sorry, mom, but I was a United States Army officer at one point, and I got my career, I got my education. I do have a degree in history, and I do identify as a historian. Um, but I want to bring that expertise and a sense of precision
Hmm.
to these occult studies, but coming from that background.
Super. Thank you for that. Um, so I guess that's a good stepping stone for us to get into kind of like your areas, specifically around, I guess, like Mayan astrology, like and your investigation is into Mayan ceremonial magic.
Yes, and I would describe it as such. There is a very bad perception of what Mayan magic looks like, and I'll just say this for housekeeping because um, this is a good knowledge check for people. There is a lot of questions coming from outside the archaeological and academic community. Maya versus Mayan. Everybody in the academic community, it's Mayan is only used for language and the calendar, and then it's Maya for everything else. However,
Right.
that wasn't always the case, and now that's even less the case. You have indigenous people that are kind of swishing and swashing the two words interchangeably. Even academics are in documentaries and official documentation in their presentations. They're entertaining the word Mayan because I think they're trying to get the point across to the general public.
Hmm.
Um, it's a bit catchier in the English language. Mayan is a better adjective. Um, However, typically that word and the usage of the word Mayan has been abused. I am taking my liberties as a practitioner and as a historian. I'm going to use the word Mayan and extend it to magic because academia doesn't recognize magic as legit, so I can do what I want with it. But yes, I do know the difference between Mayan and Mayan. So if anybody wants to, play semantics there, but what you will never hear me say are the Mayans. The Mayans, that's typically a red flag. Like this person has been reading too many pseudo accounts that are just not in good taste and it's not real information. So I use the word Mayan as a descriptor.
Right.
But Mayan magic and a lot of indigenous, this really goes for many indigenous American uh, cultures and spiritualities, has this very romanticized shamanic, this wild shamanic veneer, like this very hippy dippy, for lack of better words, veneer of peace and a Western idea of love. And sadly, it's not just a cultural appropriation of indigenous cultures. Um, a lot of this a lot of this appropriation comes from melding Far Eastern practices, lumping them in with Indigenous American practices. And all of this originates from the late 1960s and 70s and is not indigenous born. It is more so born in the sprouting yoga studios of very well off LA cosmopolitans.
Right.
So, allow me to kind of shed some light. Now, I will not, um, there is some truth to it. It is an earth-based kind of spirituality outlook upon the world, but it is not. Too much of it is portrayed as this love and light thing that melds perfectly with things like the law of attraction to the point where it's not realistic. Like we were a primal human society on this side of the earth as well. There are going to be some universal fundamentals to human society that will happen that are not pretty.
Mhm.
And the needs are virtually the same. Uh, so it's not an overly peaceful or overly simplistic approach to metaphysics. It is a highly, highly sophisticated approach to metaphysics. Well, let's start with the academic. Academia has 5 types of what they call Meso-American religion. And now it's like if people have a problem with the word religion, it's like, look, in the broad discussion, magic and spirituality, they will extend to religion. Like, it's in the same ballpark. And when you're talking in a court of law, they're probably going to bring up the R word. So let's, I think what academia actually provides us with is a good starting point. But I, as a practitioner and someone who's raised in the traditions and like kind of a traditional outlook and more time, practice time essentially, and cross training, I extend the types of Meso-American magic to 10 rather than 5. So let's go over them really quickly. Academia has 5 types of Meso-American religion. The first one they call is deific worship. This is what uh, academia would label any kind of major pantheonic religion that you find across the world. You have your council of gods that represent essentially facets of reality. Um, there is some mounting tension about the word deity and God in indigenous circles. However, okay, if you don't want to use that, you have to use some kind of word to describe some kind of divine personage. If you don't want to say being, okay, but some kind of divine personality that is capable of talking to people, communicating to humans, and has some kind of representation, because we have plenty of representations across Mesoamerica on temples, stela, ceramics, and codices. So, what are those things? Because they're not humans and they aren't even royal ancestors, because there is enough evidence in those documentations to denote that these things were never human, that they are representations of primordial things. So, what is that? Um, if we're not going to use the word deity or God, I don't have a problem with those necessarily, but I understand like essentially the colonization verbiage doesn't sit well. The Belizean Yucatec Maya have a word called Yumsil, or Yumsilob is the plural. And this basically is like your living concepts that permeate as forces of nature. And when you actually talk to people of indigenous descent that still work with the Yumsiles or the Yumsilob, uh, what you're going to come up with is very similar to what a Neoplatonic definition of what a god is. So we are talking about essentially more or less the same working definition of a high conceptual entity. So not land spirits, nothing like that. You're talking
Mhm.
about like your major archetypical forces that
Right.
conduct reality.
Right.
So that's deity worship, similar that you would find across many pagan societies. Then you have ancestral veneration. Um, I'm sure everybody in the audience is somewhat familiar with ancestral veneration, whether it is more indigenous, Afro-based, and European-based, Far Eastern-based. However, I will say, and this isn't necessarily exclusive to the Maya, but the Maya, certainly classic period Maya, have a very well documented like system of how to work with ancestral forces. In the classic period, essentially, the ruler, known as the Ahau, or Ahau, people say it translates to Lord. The most literal translation of the word Ahau means the one who speaks for many, i.e., an exalted leader. You could say a ruler, I guess, but there is an added bit of cultural honor, I guess you could say, to the distinguishment of an Ahau. But essentially, these guys were like your metaphysical quarterbacks. So I'm sure your audience is also very familiar with the idea of intermediary spirits, such as like a Saint Cyprian, or even like a Melchizedek. Skirlin's a little different, but something that was originally a human that serves as an intermediary to other higher or like major principalities, whether they're above or below, right? The ancient kings of the Maya were all intermediary spirits. Like they were all initiated in elaborate chamber rituals, and they had an obligation to the city state. And even after they died, they would be patrons of the city state. So these Ahau, they were they had metaphysical capabilities. And how I like to say it, if anybody's familiar with that game, Warhammer, and familiar with the God Emperor of Mankind, it's kind of a similar model where the Earth is like, or Terra is like, powering up the God Emperor of Mankind to act on behalf of them. And it's like they're a Gregor magic machine, but it's a being. And that's how a lot of the ancestral kings were essentially treated. That they were the metaphysical quarterback that could conjure the blessings of gods or other ancestors of just various kinds of spiritual forces. And they were the leader. They were also the spiritual leader, the magical leader that led the city state into vast ritual. So this alone, ancestral veneration is not just it's not just grandma. It's not just leaving out some cookies for grandma. While that was that was a thing, and there was actually more advanced practices like burial underneath the home and stuff in pre-Columbian societies that had to do with ancestral magic. But this opens up a whole dimension of intermediary spirits because we have their names written in stone, and we have many, many rulers that their accomplishments are etched into stone, and their rulers rival easily the best intermediary spirits that you can name across the globe. For example, Pakal, the Great, who ruled Palenque. To this day, he is the third longest reigning monarch of all time across the entire world, the longest in the Americas. He ruled for around 68 to 69 years, the city-state of Palenque during the Classic period. Certainly no American ruler has ever had office for that long. I forget who's in second place, but one of the English queens is actually the longest reigning monarch of all time. So very capable people. Very capable individuals, but it's not exclusive. Like you see, like in Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, they have a giant statue of Genghis Khan. I'm pretty sure you can do some powerful magic with that. It's a similar kind of model, but it's largely untapped, and so there's more to be explored on that front. I got plans. Then we come to time worship, which is another form of Meso-American religion. This is where the astrology comes in. Now, the astrology, you'll find some great books out there about Mayan astrology. My two favorites are How to Practice Mayan Astrology by Bruce Schofield and Mayan Astrology. The whole title escapes me, but the author is Kenneth Johnson, who's he's an initiated daykeeper. That book's fantastic as well. I totally recommend them if you want to start diving in to Mayan astrology. Mayan astrology, we can talk a little bit more about that and how it actually differs from Western astrology. But what I'm trying to bring more to the forefront is how to use it for magic, for astrological timing. Whereas how it's widely practiced is divination and kind of like a soft theurgy and how to navigate life. But as for thaumaturgic reasons, This is something that's a bit more closer to the chest of like a brujeria, like people that come from that kind of urban witchcraft uh, mode of doing. It's time magic is very well preserved by the daykeeper tradition. So the daykeeper traditions are largely in Guatemala. They actually have a daykeeper association. There's about 7,000 to 8,000 registered daykeepers. And that's a lot. That's authority figures. That's not just followers. Those are authority figures. I don't even know if the Golden Dawn had that many authority figures.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I don't know if modern Thelema does either. So
I doubt it.
that's a pretty sizable body. You know what I'm
Can you just
saying?
tell me what is a daykeeper?
So the daykeepers essentially are um, vocational individuals. I'm trying not to say the word priests, but they're vocational individuals that serve a similar function to priests or societal communal shamans. That what they do is they maintain the counting of the Meso-American calendar to the modern day.
Mhm.
It is inherent in Meso-American metaphysics, as per all of the creation myths, that humanity's responsibility is to take track of time and to count the suns, so to speak. So the daykeepers in Quiche Maya are the Ahiab or the Akin in Yucatec Maya. It means those who count the faces of the sun. That's
Okay.
their actual literal translation. But they keep the count of days, which harkens back to our ancestral responsibilities and tracks our history since the beginning of time with our creation mythos.
Mhm.
So they have that vocation. Now, many of them, I don't want to box daykeepers in because they have their different styles as well. The Sutujil style is very different from Quiche. Cachiquel is different from Quiche, um, and different from the Mom style. So they're pretty diverse within themselves. However, when I'm talking about daykeepers, I'm largely talking about those in Guatemala. You do find them a bit around uh, elsewhere in the Maya world. The Maya world's it's very big. It's bigger than a lot of people would think, and much more diverse in spiritual practices than people would think. But they are kind of like the biggest body of Maya established practitioners. I will say that again, they're all pretty dynamic, and they all have their own personal beliefs and agendas as well. But daykeepers largely are much more mystic, and they have vocations, much more theurgic. And there are people that are more thaumaturgic. Think this is not too dissimilar from like that sorcerer at the end of town. That's where like my family comes from.
Right.
Is we come from the sorcerers at the edge of town, and there are some things that daykeepers do not feel comfortable doing, and they will go to somebody like my bisabuela or somebody like my abuelo, where if you want something done, you go to a specialist for it.
Right.
But for more thaumaturgic purposes, like I said. So yes. Uh, moving on from time, and we can come back to that because the astrology is what I'm trying to bind together with
Mhm.
my efforts. It's the most immediate thing that I could offer people. But moving on to the fourth type is animism. So animism's kind of having like a comeback season these days in like Western circles, I see. But animism in the indigenous sense is, I would say, it's much more expansive and nuanced. The old Cecil Rhodes approach, I guess, is that, oh, they just think anything's alive and anything has a spirit. It's like, well, yeah, but it's like, there's more to it,
Mhm.
like many things. I think animism these days is kind of just becoming a buzzword and more like social media, out in the internet ethers. But it is not simply everything is a spirit. Everything has specific metaphysical correspondences. I think the biggest example of this that you can find in Mesoamerica is that of the veneration of Ishim, which is corn. Corn was the crop that gave us civilization. It allowed us to stop being nomadic and brought us together and brought communities together and eventually kingdoms and gave birth to key leaders, and we could make monumental achievements. Corn essentially allowed us to survive. And in the Maya mythos, humans, are made of corn, not mud. And I know mud is a common substance that is used to create humans across the world. But on this side of the globe, on this hemisphere, I like to think of the planet Earth as a brain, more or less. And this side of the hemisphere, it is corn that is the divine spark substance, if you will. And that's truly how it's described is that the people that are made of maize are beholden to this, for lack of better word, divine spark, whereas past attempts to try to make humans out of mud and wood failed, and they were hollow creatures. This is not too dissimilar to how you find across other mythos of like prototype humans or other kinds of ancient adjacent creatures, or like, humanoid type creatures. They were essentially not worthy, or they had abused their rights to existence. And it's those that come to a recollection of the divine spark that are actually able to have the benefits of the gods. So animism very nuanced, but I do like to start with Mais or Ishim when that discussion. Um, One of the fifth type that academia recognizes is shamanism. So shamanism is not simply ingesting substances, despite what all the Silicon Valley tech bros want to do for their spiritual practice. It's also journeying to different planes. And most notably in Meso-America, the biggest standout quality of this is what's called Nagualism, which is essentially like a Native American lycanthropy. People may have heard of skinwalkers as kind of like the more grim expression of such. But Nagualism is essentially tapping into what people call an animal coessence. Every human has a animal, not, New Age talk would call it a spirit animal, but it is not simply something cuddly. The most literal translation is your duality. And that is a big fundamental principle in Meso-American cosmology, is this concept of duality. The nothing in nature works alone, including you. When you go to sleep, your Nagual is awake, as in your animal coessence. And to develop a relationship with the Nagual is to essentially engage with the divine elements of existence. It is a very powerful experience. It's truly a shamanic experience, and I would classify dream magic into this, because that's really when you can most accessibly uh, activate your Nawal, is when you are asleep, so to speak, um, and when your duality takes over. Now, I do extend these types of magic because there are, like, as a practitioner, you can look at a lot of these practices and find very key and important minutia. When I read a lot of archaeological documents, and I have a lot of archaeologist friends I cross-pollinate my notes with, there's straight up rituals and spells in there. Like, you don't have to really adapt much.
Right.
And when I'm looking at it, I really see between the lines as a practitioner. I'm like, oh, I don't know if they notice this, but like this is basically like an excerpt from a grimoire here or there, like in what they're able to translate or where they're able to pick up. So I'm kind of disappointed, like when people are in modern kind of efforts to reclaim indigenous magic, they're really just ripping off of things from the Far East, and they're culturally appropriating a mishmash of things that, while there is some kind of continuity, like there is a continuity between Mesoamerica, North America, and South America because of the proliferation of corn as a divine substance. However, when you start throwing uh, Quechua deity names in with Maya names, this is not culturally sound, and it's pretty disrespectful. And as a much more practical magician, it's operationally inefficient. It's putting things in a system that does not congeal. It's like it's not going one way. It's like fixing a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and throwing a bed of lettuce in there. It's like it's just not gonna it's not gonna taste good. But within archaeological documentation, within other more obscure texts like the Ritual of the Bacabs or the Rabin al-Achi, you will find actual rituals that, like, I, as a practitioner, could like kind of plug and play. But it's kind of hard because what has to be accounted for with expansion and reclamation is that many inhabitants of Latin America, the literacy is it's poor. Even in Spanish, you'll find people that can speak fluent Spanish, but to read fluent Spanish, it's only now becoming a bit more commonplace. And then even their own indigenous language, to read it, you've had like layers of disconnect in the last 500 years to where people are disconnected from their own history. But there's magical gold in these
Right.
documents, magical gold in these translations. So this is where I'm coming in with a Western education. I can go back and look at indigenous stuff and see a whole treasure trove of untapped magic.
Right.
So that is part of these additional systems. And one of them is geospatial worship. This is think your directional magic. It starts as directional magic, but it branches off into essentially what our ancestors would classify physical dimensionality,
Right.
as in like they had some kind of idea of of the second dimension and what succeeds us in the fourth dimensional and plus, in more primitive ways of saying it, obviously. But that all begins with geospatial worship. Um, the idea of four directions or four corners. And in Meso-America, there's technically five, six, or seven, depending on how inside baseball you want to go, directions of how to approach these directional spirits. And people in Western cosmologies would be very familiar with like the four demonic kings or the archangels of the directions, or even Wicca has kinds of principalities of the directions.
Hmm.
You have that same principle here, however, they don't match up. So I could get into this later about why we do need to incorporate this, especially for North American practitioners. European magic is absolutely valid here in North America. America is a melting pot, but there is a reason why the default cosmologies had certain associations on this continent, and it's very immediate and land based. So I would say that that's something we should definitely prioritize, because South and Mesoamerica does not have the same correspondences that it does in Europe. While we both have a veneration for this idea of South
Hmm.
and its correspondences, they don't match up. So we can hit this point of convergence and be like, oh, yes, we have the same principle, but it's not the same thing. So it's not as easy as a plug and play. And I think that needs to be respected.
Right.
Um, Another form of magic I would extend to is linguistic worship, essentially ancient sigil magic. So in the Popol Vuh, uh, the creation story of the Quiche Maya says that what differentiates us human beings from everything else is speech, poetry, and art.
Right.
So this idea of recitation, conscious recitation, is magic. Speech is magic. Writing is magic.
Hmm.
So the hieroglyphic system of the Maya that is super multi-layered, and you can ask any archaeologist in the world, they'll tell you the most elegant of the ancient writing systems, the four original ones, whether it's Chinese Hanzi, Mesopotamian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphs, or Mayan hieroglyphs. The most elegant and multi-layered one is easily the Maya, and by extension Meso-American hieroglyphic systems. And linguistic worship, and the idea of using speech and writing incantations, but specifically drawing hieroglyphs, is super powerful. I use it basically as a form of super sigil magic. It's a super sigil magic kind of thing. Because it's multi-layered, it is not as simple as like the Osman Spare or the Grant Morrison style. And I would say that simpler style certainly actually has some advantages to it because it's easily deployable.
Hmm.
But you could easily stack layers of efficacy utilizing a hieroglyphic language. Even when I'm pretty well versed in Western esotericism, and I've done a lot of Ars Paulina and Grimoire style magic, I always found an added layer of oomph when it came to writing things in a specific script. So, like planetary archangel things, I would use Theban script for. I would have to look at my sources, but I would use the Theban script for a certain planet, and I found that another angel and its planetary associations preferred passing of the rivers, and then another one preferred Enochian script. Um, so I found an added layer of oomph using those scripts, and it
Right.
encoded, essentially like encoded into a reality that I was not cognizant of, right? Magic. Utilizing these scripts and petitions and utilizing pentacles and sacred symbologies. Um, I experienced that even in Western magic. So this idea is very sound throughout esoteric principles that you can find elsewhere. Um, the other types, I'm moving on here to energetic bodies. I cannot tell you my frustrations with there is another Meso-American practice called curanderismo, and I don't want to play the blame game on him. It's just curanderismo seems to be the channel of which this cultural appropriation kind of made its way through, most notably in the it was definitely there in like the 70s and 80s, but it was really fever pitched during the 2012 craze when you had a lot of Westerners going on a vacation boom to Cancun and Playa del Carmen, and they would go to Chichen Itza, and you would have some real Maya shamans there, and you would have some fake ones too. But the one thing that they knew about energetic bodies, but the only ones that Westerners knew about were chakras.
Mhm.
So they used chakras because chakras sold, because like people, oh, I want to get my chakras aligned. I find it disappointing because chakras, I do believe chakras are legitimate, but they're not Meso-American. And I think that effort for profit, and even if you want to rationalize it, bring spotlight to the indigenous communities, okay, but it has now culturally appropriated multiple cultures.
Right.
And that is not right, especially when energetic bodies, we have actual documented systems of energetic bodies. This is so frustrating because uh, we have energetic bodies that are exclusive to
Mhm.
Mesoamerica. And I know this because I have cross-referenced these energy bodies with Vedic chakra practitioners, both stateside and in India. There's this energy called Koyopa in uh, Mesoamerica, most notably in the highlands of Guatemala with the daykeeper tradition. Sometimes it's called Ishkoyopa. It's a feminine force, and it corresponds to 13 energy bodies within the
Mhm.
human body. These 13 energy bodies have to do with the human joints. And I have crossed, if somebody knows a yogi that I don't, I have cross referenced this with multiple Vedic authorities
Mhm.
that the joints are not recognized in the chakra system because they're dead spots. So here we have, I'm not saying one is superior to the other, but
Mhm.
what this is evidence of is that, wow, this is exclusively Mesoamerican.
Mhm.
And it is a very powerful thing. The daykeepers use Koyopa to divinate and do magic. Some of them don't like to say that for like more thaumaturgic purposes, but they use it for divinatory purposes and theurgic purposes. Um, and it will reverberate in certain. There will be like a favorite spot in the body
Mhm.
that it likes to go to, and it is described as like a serpent, like a lightning force.
Right.
Typically, Koyopod translates to the lightning in the blood, but it is not Kundalini. It's not the same exact thing as Kundalini. Um, like because I've had a Kundalini experience myself too, and I can tell you that the two are different. Koyopa is much more. It is almost like you can negotiate with it, almost like it is very zippy, but it's not. It's not just going to run amok in your house, so to speak. And like sometimes people have Kundalini experiences, and they're like, they're in low orbit and they're not coming down for a while. Um, but that's one system, and then there's another system uh, that has to do with corresponding to the day signs that are found in the calendar system as well. This one's more masculine. These are actually more like chakras because they're about non-objective parts of the body. Because your joints, they're objective. Like I can, point to your joints. Like you have an elbow, you have a knee, you have hips. Whereas these are essentially more energetic and soft. They're not as distinguishable, but they are mapped on the body, and there's 20 of them. So here we have two completely. They're complementary too, as well. They kind of go together as like again duality,
Yeah.
but they are exclusively Mesoamerican. And we have a chart. We have like an actual like energetic, like almost a Vitruvian man chart in the Codex Vaticanus B. that survives from the colonial era, but it's a Mexica text. It uses the Mexica day signs, but there have been daykeepers that have reverse engineered it to the Maya day signs. And the two day signs, the two calendars mesh very well. Many of the same concepts are the same despite differences in the language. But yes, so I grow frustrated with the energetic bodies because people want to throw chakras on things and call it a day, when it's like there's so much exploring here to do. So um, part of my vocation and my work that going forward is bringing this energetic practice more to the forefront. Um, Another form is narrative worship. So narrative worship, what I mean by this is like the biggest example is what you find in folklore. And this is big in the colonial era, but like you find it throughout many different Maya folk tales that are even pre-Columbian, like in the Popol Vuh. Um, this idea of living stories and how they affect reality.
Okay.
And we were actually kind of talking about one. I think the Ilya Taporia to Conor McGregor connection there of like kind of this recurring storyline spirit.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by narrative worship, because you see this with like the legend of Los Cadejos, you see, the white dog, black dog legend, as it is called. You find this with El Canil, the man of lightning. You find this with El Charro Negro, he's called in Mexico, but he's called El Sombreron in Guatemala, who's essentially like a colonial era indigenous ghost rider, like from the Marvel comics. It's very similar. And La Llorona is another big one. You also you see this happen with the duendes, which are kind of like Meso-American dwarves. They kind of cross the barriers between geospatial and narrative, but you have this idea of narrative worship, and as far as like the storyline spirit, not just like these characters, but the actual, I'm going to say something in a story and it will happen. This is what Maya kings did by recording their history. It wasn't just recording history for the sake of recording history. It was for the sake of making it manifest. All of the stela are basically recorded on this day, this. That's why we have such great records, is because they were time bound with how they recorded dates. But it was also like a declaration to stamp into reality. And there are several examples. Don't really have time to go into them, but essentially when entire kingdoms were destroyed, how do you recollect its history? With mythos. And that's what several Maya rulers had done for their kingdoms. And what was the real world consequence? Well, they rebuilt a kingdom to have massive geopolitical consequences on that side of the world during medieval medieval Mexican times or medieval Meso-American times, or antiquity. It happens in multiple cases. So this idea of living stories, and again, it's like I'm a big fan of Grant Morrison, so his ideas of hypersigils. This is very much ancient hypersigils or ancient pataphysics. That's what happened, and it's still happening because El Charro Negro, El Sombreron, is a colonial era. And then the 10th one I will extend to is cosmological structures. This is where I really, really try to emphasize that, guys, indigenous cultures have less to do with like the flower child revolutions of the 1960s, and they have more to do with like Cornelius Agrippa, and they have more to do with like the various cosmological structures that you find in Tibetan Buddhism and like the Egyptian books of the dead, and some like a very detailed map of the realms. The easiest one to kind of dive into is the upper world, middle world, underworld kind of model. But even then, there are so many other cosmological structures. There's a lot of Atlantean things that are thrown onto new world societies, and a lot of those are actually manifest destiny propaganda. A lot of them are white supremacist propaganda, but the Maya have their own ancient city, like a paradisal super city called Tulan. And that is a cosmological structure that is found in the Popol Vuh. The Aztecs have their own version of it as well. And that idea is a cosmological structure, this kind of like fleeting utopia or super place
Right.
for humans. So all of these have metaphysical correspondences and ways of journeying or utilizing them for magic. That's why I'm trying to really emphasize here. There are more connections to like what ceremonial magic wants to find in its own traditions
Hmm.
between Mesoamerica and that. It is not simply this I don't know, this nostalgic pagan escapism that a lot of people want to ascribe it to. It is very sophisticated magic, and as I said, like before we hopped on, there's about 120 to 140 recognized pyramidal structures in Egypt, and I think about 200 include if you include pagan Europe, Greece, and Rome. In 2010, there was 10,000 in Mesoamerica alone.
That's
10,000 recorded. That was in 2010, like
mm,
right when LIDAR was just getting discovered. Just this
right.
year in
Yeah.
2025, two entirely lost cities were discovered in Campeche, Mexico. Part of that is because of the landscape, but it's part of because Mesoamericans were master builders.
Hmm.
I'm not saying one society is superior to the other, not at all. I hold the same anthropological standpoint that Star Trek had, civilizations grow up asymmetrically. You know,
Hmm.
the New World did not have advanced metallurgy like Europe did, but the Aztecs took daily baths,
Hmm.
and they had an aquarium, and they had a zoo. They had operas, and so to speak. The life expectancy was higher here. However, the West had gunpowder. It's societies grow up asymmetrically, but there's so much that we can learn from each other. We can celebrate these differences.
Hmm.
And for a society that has 10,000 plus massive ceremonial structures that did citywide rituals, so you're talking thousands of people. This isn't like your local Gnostic mass. We're talking thousands of people. That takes systems. That's not intuitive that's not intuitive flow, man. Like that is systems upon systems and sophistication, philosophy and theory and practice all wrapped into it. So that's the crux of my work, is presenting a lot of this to the grander occult community.
Hmm.
And again, a lot of this is unknown because it's coming from communities where it's not okay to talk about magic.
Right.
The point of doing magic is to get out of magic.
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
for people like us, go get your degree, go get married, go have a family, be happy. Whereas, I'm grateful to Western magicians because they want to talk about these things.
As Solomon, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been very illuminating, and for people who want to find out more about your work, follow you. Where's the best place for them to do so?
The best place is Mystery Codex on Substack, or you can just go to solomonpakal.com. I'll take you to Mysteries Codex on Substack. You can find me on Instagram as well, but the majority of my work goes through Substack, and I do have a YouTube channel, Solomon Pakal. But Substack is really where the gold's at, and if you become a paid subscriber on Substack, you get all the YouTube content way ahead early,
Right.
and an
Right.
additional article, and there's all kinds of exclusive goodies there too. But
Brilliant.
yeah,
Great.
Substack's where it's at.
Great stuff. And when your book makes its way onto the shelves, then do come back on the show. Let's talk about it.
Absolutely, it would be my pleasure again. Been a big fan, so
Oh,
it's good to
fantastic.
be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you again.
Wonderful, wonderful stuff. I bet you weren't expecting us to start talking about Conor McGregor, were you? And Ilia Topuria. But there you go. There you go. Really, what we're talking about there is the embodiment of a narrative, or a wearing of an archetype of some description. You really kind of have to know MMA to get that. So, or be at least a basic fanboy like me. Anyway, I will leave it there. I hope you all got something from that super interesting area to explore today. And take care and talk soon. I'm Darren Mason. You've been listening to Spirit Box. Bye.